Welcome to Karen Stories, where the wildest Karen encounters unfold. Get ready for hilarious, unbelievable, and shocking moments as Karens make the most outrageous demands. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to never miss a crazy story. Let's dive in. I was already running on fumes that evening. My shift was dragging longer than expected, my feet ached from the endless walking, and the caffeine buzz from my last break had long since faded. The cafe was busy, the kind of busy that made time warp in a blur of clinking glasses, murmured conversations, and the rhythmic whoosh of the espresso machine. Then she walked in. The first thing I noticed was the air about her, the way she carried herself like she owned the place, chin up, lips pursed in that unmistakable look of quiet dissatisfaction. She was the kind of woman who scanned a room and immediately started keeping score, tallying who was worth her time and who was not. She made a beeline for the counter, cutting in front of a couple still debating their order. I opened my mouth to say something standard policy. After all, but the way she flicked her manicured fingers in the air, dismissing them as if they were invisible, made my words shrivel in my throat. "I need a cappuccino," she declared, her voice loud enough to cut through the cafe noise. "And make sure it's extra hot. Last time I was here, it was lukewarm." Honestly, what kind of establishment serves coffee that isn't scalding? I reached for my notepad, nodding. "Got it. One extra hot cappuccino. Anything else?" She squinted at my name tag, lips curling into something between amusement and disdain. "Huh. Your name is interesting. Very exotic. Were your parents trying to be creative?" I knew that tone. It was the same one used by people who acted like compliments were meant to be daggers, disguised just enough to be excusable if you called them out. I forced a polite smile, resisting the urge to roll my eyes. "Just one extra hot cappuccino," I repeated, keeping my tone even. She hummed as if she hadn't heard me, then suddenly snapped her fingers. "Wait! Actually, I want a croissant too, but only if it's fresh. I don't want something that's been sitting there all day." "They're fresh," I assured her, punching in the order. We'll see about that," she muttered, pulling out her phone and scrolling absent-mindedly as I handed her the receipt. I turned to prepare her drink, grateful for the temporary reprieve. But before I could even reach for the milk steamer, her voice cut through the air again. "Actually, hold on." I paused. "Yes?" She leaned against the counter, eyes scanning me like I was some sort of puzzle she was trying to figure out. "You work here often? I don't remember seeing you before." "I've been here for a while," I said, treading carefully. She nodded, almost approvingly. Then, with a smirk, she added, "And what else do you do? I mean, surely you have aspirations beyond this?" She gestured vaguely at the cafe. I bit the inside of my cheek. "I do, actually. I play the piano." Her eyebrows lifted, and then, right there, I saw it. That glint in her eyes. The kind of look people gave when they saw an opportunity to turn a conversation into something else entirely. Something they could twist, manipulate, use to entertain themselves. "Oh, a musician?" she mused, tapping a manicured nail against the counter. "How cute. Well, since you claim to be so talented, why don't you play something for us?" I blinked. "Excuse me?" She gestured toward the grand piano in the corner of the cafe, the one mostly reserved for weekend performances. "Go ahead, entertain us. Unless you're not actually that good?" The cafe had suddenly gone quiet. I felt the weight of the room shift. A challenge had been issued, but I knew better. This wasn't curiosity. It wasn't genuine interest. It was a test, a trap. She expected me to stammer, to refuse, to shrink beneath her condescension. I took a breath, steadying myself. "Fine," I said, meeting her gaze. "I'll play." The moment the word left my mouth, I saw the flicker of surprise cross her face, just for a second. She wasn't expecting me to accept her challenge. She thought I'd shrink, stammer, maybe even backtrack and try to laugh it off. But I didn't. I just stood there, unwavering. Her smirk returned, sharper now, the kind that people wear when they think they've already won. Oh, wonderful, she purred, stepping back dramatically as if making space for my inevitable failure. This should be good. I wiped my hands on my apron, feeling the subtle tremble in my fingers. Not from fear. No, it was something else. A slow, simmering heat bubbling under my ribs. Not nerves, not stage fright. Rage. As I walked toward the piano, I felt the weight of the room shift. The cafe wasn't silent, not entirely, but conversations had quieted. Eyes were on me, some filled with curiosity, others with amusement. Even my coworkers had stopped what they were doing, their gazes bouncing between me and the woman like they were waiting for an explosion. Karen, because let's be honest, that's exactly what she was, followed at a leisurely pace, a gleeful light in her eyes as if she had just set up the punchline to a joke only she was in on. I pulled out the piano bench and sat down, my spine straight, my hands hovering just above the keys. My heart was a drum inside my chest, a slow, deliberate rhythm. You do know how to play, don't you? She taunted, arms crossed, her voice just loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. I didn't answer. Instead, I let my fingers fall, pressing into the keys, pulling the first haunting notes from the piano. A slow, delicate melody drifted into the cafe air, and the moment it did, the energy in the room changed. Karen's smirk twitched. Just a little. I didn't just play, I commanded the piano. My fingers danced, fluid and effortless, weaving together notes so rich, so full of something untouchable, that the usual clinking of coffee cups and quiet chatter faded into nothing. My body knew this piece like it knew the sound of my own breath. Each key struck with purpose, each chord building, unfolding into something more, something deeper. For the first time since she walked into this cafe, Karen was quiet. I let the last note linger, ringing out in the heavy silence that followed. My hands rested on the keys, unmoving, my pulse thrumming. Then the applause came, soft at first, then growing, rippling through the cafe in waves. My coworkers clapped, some grinning, like they had been in on a secret the whole time. A few customers stood, murmuring words I couldn't quite make out, words I didn't need to hear to understand. Karen, however, was still frozen in place. Her expression was something between disbelief and barely contained annoyance, as if she had just realized that the joke wasn't on me, it was on her. I turned in my seat, meeting her gaze head-on. Was that good enough for you? I asked, my voice even. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her fingers twitched against her designer purse, gripping the strap like it was the only thing grounding her. Well, she said finally, forcing a laugh, but it was thin, brittle. I suppose even the most unexpected places have some talent. Even now, even after everything, she couldn't give me the satisfaction of admitting she was wrong, but she didn't have to. Because the look on her face, the way her cheeks burned under the weight of everyone's stares, told me I had already won. For a moment, I thought that was it, that I'd won, that Karen, thoroughly humiliated and outmatched, would gather whatever dignity she had left and leave with nothing but a bitter memory of her own arrogance. But of course, I had underestimated the sheer, unrelenting entitlement that powered people like her. The tension in the cafe was still thick, the air still humming with the aftershock of my performance. The applause had died down, but the energy hadn't dissipated. People were still glancing at me, whispering to each other, some smiling, others shaking their heads at Karen's pathetic attempt to demean me. Karen, however, was not finished. Well, she said, clearing her throat, that same brittle laugh escaping her lips. That was cute, cute, cute. The word sliced through the moment, cheapening everything. I felt my jaw clench, my fingers curling into my palms. I had just shut her down in the most elegant, undeniable way possible, and this was her takeaway. Before I could respond, she turned to the crowd, gesturing vaguely in my direction. I mean, sure, she can play a few notes. That's adorable. Really. But let's not act like she's Mozart. She let out a sharp, clipped chuckle, shaking her head. Honestly, I don't see what all the fuss is about. It's just a cafe, not Carnegie Hall. A hush settled over the room. The mood had shifted again, but this time it was different. People weren't just annoyed anymore. They were watching. They were waiting. Karen must have felt it too, because she immediately tried to regain control. Anyway, she said, flipping her hair over one shoulder, if you spent half as much time working as you do showing off, maybe this place would have better service. Oh, so that's how she wanted to play this. I inhaled slowly, pressing my tongue against my teeth to keep from laughing. It was almost impressive, the sheer refusal to admit defeat, the desperate scramble to reassert dominance when it was clear she had lost. I had seen it before, but never this spectacularly. I appreciate the feedback, I said smoothly, standing up from the piano bench. Really, I do. I leveled my gaze at her, making sure she could feel the weight of my next words before I even said them. I just wasn't aware that exceptional talent was an inconvenience to you. A few people chuckled, low and amused. Karen's expression twitched. She scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. Oh, please, don't flatter yourself. People were clapping because they were being polite. She turned to a nearby table, eyes narrowing on an older gentleman who had been one of the first to applaud. Isn't that right? The man blinked at her, looking mildly insulted. No, he said simply. She was brilliant. Karen's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. I tilted my head. Huh. Seems like people actually enjoyed it. Her face was turning red now, blotchy in a way that screamed barely contained rage. You know what? Fine, whatever. If you want to waste your life playing cheap lounge music for pennies, be my guest. And there it was. The final blow, the last desperate, flailing insult she could muster. But it didn't land the way she wanted it to. Because she knew. She had lost. I smiled. Not wide, not mocking. Just enough. Just enough to let her know that whatever power she thought she had over me had evaporated the second I touched those piano keys. I stepped back, dusting off my apron. Your cappuccino should be ready at the counter, I said casually. Extra hot, just like you ordered. She made a sound somewhere between a scoff and a growl and spun on her heel, marching toward the register like a woman trying to outrun her own embarrassment. And just like that, the cafe exhaled. Conversations resumed. Chairs scraped against the floor. My coworkers exchanged glances that said, "Did that really just happen?" I let out a slow breath, rolling my shoulders. Karen had come here expecting to make a spectacle of me. Instead, she had made one of herself, and somehow that was even better. Just as I thought it was over, that Karen had finally collected what remained of her dignity and would leave the cafe with nothing but her own bruised ego, she made a fatal mistake. She turned back. One hand gripped the counter as she scoffed, shaking her head like she had finally figured out how to twist this whole situation back in her favor. You know what? It's pathetic, really, she sneered, loud enough for the whole cafe to hear. All of you clapping like trained seals for a waitress who happens to know a few notes on the piano. Do you people not have standards anymore? The room tensed again. My coworkers exchanged looks, the air buzzing with secondhand embarrassment for her. Even the barista at the counter paused mid-pour, as if considering whether to toss the scalding cappuccino at her instead. Karen wasn't done. She turned her attention back to me, her smile thin and venomous. Tell me something, sweetheart. If you're so damn talented, why are you wasting your time in some second-rate coffee shop instead of actually making something of yourself? I could have ignored it. I could have let her stomp out of the cafe and let her own words rot inside her. But something about her tone, the sheer arrogance laced through every syllable, made my blood simmer. I didn't have to answer her, but I wanted to. I took a slow breath and leaned against the piano, letting my fingers drift over the keys in an absent-minded motion. That's an interesting question, I mused. But before I answer, do you mind if I ask you something? Karen rolled her eyes. Oh, by all means. I tilted my head, watching her carefully. How much do you know about classical music? That threw her for a second. What? Classical music? I repeated, my voice smooth. Piano, composers. You know, the kind of thing people with actual standards would be familiar with, she scoffed. I know enough. Great, I said, nodding. Then you must have heard of Celeste Johnson. Her lips pursed slightly, like she was trying to place the name but didn't want to admit she didn't recognize it. Sure. Why? I let the silence stretch for a beat before I finally said, because that's me. It took a second for the words to land. The shift was subtle at first, a flicker of confusion in her eyes as the name slowly sank in. Then came the realization, the widening of her pupils, the twitch in her lips as understanding crashed over her like a tidal wave. The cafe had gone dead silent. My coworkers were watching with barely contained excitement, while the customers, some already recognizing my name, leaned in, eager for what came next. Karen's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. No, she said flatly. That's not. One of the older gentlemen near the window suddenly gasped. Oh my God, he murmured. The Celeste Johnson? The pianist? A woman near him clapped a hand over her mouth. I thought, she looked familiar. The weight of the moment crushed whatever rebuttal Karen had been about to throw at me. Her face paled, her hands tightening around her overpriced designer purse. I shrugged, offering her a small, polite smile. I took a break from touring a while back, I said casually. Needed a change of pace. Turns out, I like the atmosphere of this cafe. Thought it would be nice to work somewhere normal for a while. Karen's mouth was moving, but no words came out. Her brain was short-circuiting, scrambling for a way to undo the last 30 seconds of her life. I let her flounder for another beat before adding, so, yeah, that's why I'm wasting my time here. A slow, delicious wave of laughter rippled through the cafe. Even the barista, who had been holding back, let out a sharp chuckle. Someone clapped. Another murmured, "This is so much better than reality TV." Karen swallowed hard, her face now an impressive shade of red. She took a step back like she was considering just bolting out the door. I picked up the cappuccino from the counter and held it out to her. Extra hot, I reminded her, smiling. Just like you asked. Her hand trembled slightly as she took it, but she didn't say a word. Didn't even look at me. Just turned on her heel and marched toward the exit, her shoulders stiff, her steps quick and uneven. The door swung shut behind her. The cafe erupted. I turned back to my coworkers, who were grinning like they had just witnessed a historic event. One of them clapped me on the back. I knew there was something about you, he said, shaking his head. But damn, I chuckled, shaking off the adrenaline still coursing through me. Just another day, right? But as I glanced toward the window, watching Karen stomp away in a fit of silent rage, I couldn't help but think, some lessons are just better learned the hard way. The cafe was still buzzing long after Karen stormed out, her overpriced heels clicking against the pavement in a rhythm that screamed wounded pride. People were still whispering, some glancing at the door like they half expected her to come barging back in with some last-ditch attempt to salvage her dignity. But we all knew it was over. I exhaled slowly, the rush of adrenaline finally beginning to fade. The barista grinned at me as he slid a latte across the counter. On the house, for the celebrity pianist. I laughed softly, shaking my head. You're never gonna let that go, are you? Not a chance. I took the drink, relishing the warmth between my palms. The rest of the cafe had moved on, conversations shifting back to normal, but there was still an undercurrent of energy, a lingering charge from the spectacle that had just unfolded. And then, as if the universe wasn't done with Karen just yet, the door swung open again. For a split second, the entire cafe seemed to freeze. My coworkers stopped mid-task. A few customers held their breath, Even I felt a twinge of youve, got to be kidding me pulse through my veins. But it wasn't Karen. It was a man, well-dressed, sharp-eyed. He scanned the cafe briefly before locking eyes with me. Celeste Johnson? I blinked. Yes? He smiled, stepping forward. I was sitting near the back, saw everything, and more importantly, heard everything. I have to say, that was one hell of a performance. I straightened slightly. Thank you? He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a card, placing it on the counter. I'm with a production company. We're scouting for a new project, live performances, special features, that sort of thing. If you're ever interested in stepping back onto a bigger stage, give me a call. I stared at the card for a long moment. My name was still buzzing in the air, the weight of Karen's failed attempt to humiliate me still fresh. And now, here was an opportunity. A real one. Karen had wanted to make me feel small. She had wanted me to shrink under her gaze, to be nothing more than a footnote in her evening of condescension. Instead, she had handed me something far better than a moment of revenge. She had reminded me exactly who I was. I picked up the card, rolling it between my fingers. I'll think about it. The man nodded, offering one last smile before heading out. As soon as the door swung shut behind him, I exhaled, shaking my head in disbelief. So, my coworker leaned against the counter, smirking. How does it feel knowing Karen probably went home to Google your name and cry into her $300 spillo? I chuckled, taking a sip of my latte. Honestly, feels perfect.